Okay, Jacob Grieg from Liftango. How are you? Thank you for joining me on Life Before the Virus.
Thanks for having me, Skye. I'm really well, thanks. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Yes, all the way from California, where you are now.
Yeah, in sunny Oakland at the moment. So yeah, we've been loving the sunshine. I don't know. I don't think it's barely rained this year, so it's been very nice. So if there's a place you have to be stuck and locked down, it could be worse. That's for sure.
Right, and being able to spread out and how your area is reopening, and just like Manhattan is reopening now, and people are going back to work, and we're having conversations about where do we live long term. Young couples, newlyweds, we're talking about where do we settle down and create a life for ourselves when companies like Twitter, out by you, are saying employees never have to come to the office ever again.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing actually to see the way it's affecting people's decision making and commuter habits. Where I mean, even if I take myself and some of the friends I have around here, yeah, a lot of them are employed by tech companies. They've been able to work from home, so that's kind of broken through a lot of the barrier, which wasn't practical. It was more, I don't know, cultural, or this was the way we've always done things. There was a fear of letting go of that control of having everyone in the office, and everyone's being forced out of that now, out of their comfort zone. And there's been good and bad to working from home, but certainly the need to come into an office seems to have be in decline. And like, I have friends who work in facilities groups for some of the big tech companies, and they said every one of them has gotten their lease out and has started to see whether they can get out of their big lease. We could see a really big change. Yeah, what did I see? The rental prices in San Francisco have dropped close to 20% already, and areas surrounding the Bay Area that are green and in the forest, and you can get a house for the sort of money that you get a tiny studio in San Francisco, are
Right.
suddenly looking really busy. So I think, seeing how that all settles down and what that means for commuters and mobility companies and transport companies is is the question on everyone's lips.
Right. And that's where you come in with Liftango. So tell us about the company and what's going on.
Yeah, so Liftango, we started about 4 years ago in Australia, and our technology is really all about helping people to access shared mobility. So basically, if a vehicle has more than one seat in it, and you want to open it up to enable people to share it and use it, that's where our technology comes in. And we've applied that to carpool. So our first product was around helping people get to work and share their commute with each other. So really acknowledging that we have a huge problem in all of our cities with people just driving and driving on their own. I think globally it's close to 80% of people commute to work driving on their own, and hence we have such clogged roads and all the problems of congestion and emissions and things that were a focus pre-COVID, and become even probably more of a focus in we move into the post-COVID world. But yeah, so really our technology, we started with the carpool, and then we've applied it to buses as well. And that's really where we've seen a lot of interest in the last few months. Our technology enables you to take a bus service that, up until now has always run fixed route, fixed schedule. And the poor bus operators and the transit agencies do all this studying to try and guess where people will need the bus to try and maximize the value of the bus service, but also the utilization of the bus service for them. And then that's becoming really, really difficult to do in a COVID world. So with our technology, we enable you to open it up to what we call dynamic matching. So you can do away with a fixed route, you can do away with a fixed schedule, and really, you book the bus from your phone, and then the bus is able to respond to that demand and go and pick people up in the best way. So yeah, we think there was a lot of interest in it before. Over the last few years, it's started to become something that's part of public transit and corporate transit. But we've really seen this as kind of pushed people's thinking, because all of the assumptions around the way people would move has changed completely. The rule book's out the window. We have to kind of replan and rethink the whole thing. So yeah, so it's an exciting time for us. We've got a few projects that we're looking at in the US, the UK, Sweden, Australia, and New Zealand. And it's just interesting on a global scale. Everyone is facing similar challenges, but to varying degrees of maturity. You take the US, you've got the fear in the US for everyone is that all the great work that shared mobility people have done over the last few years to try and get people to drop their car keys and find another way to get to work. Everyone's scared that we're just going to face the Carmageddon where everyone just goes back to their cars, because all the studies are showing that people are somewhat scared of public transit, and you know, fearful of really sharing their space under the sort of COVID world. So I think there's a lot of energy being put into stopping people going back to their cars. And then in Europe, where we've had some contact as well, the challenge there is car ownership has been in decline for a long time. There's a lot of commuters, a bit like New York City and some of our biggest cities in the US, where people don't own a car. That's never been the way that they've gotten to work. And now suddenly public transit isn't there, or they're scared of using it. And so what do you do for them as well? So yeah, it's a whole new sort of set of challenges that cities are facing.
Right. So before COVID, like you're saying, everyone was talking about micro mobility and transit and sharing vehicles. And then during COVID, everyone's scared of getting
Yeah.
near someone else on public transit. And now, because of this new dynamic with where are people going to live, are we going to commute to work? It really does reopen the conversation in a different way that maybe you wouldn't have considered a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, like I think I was talking to someone a few days ago, and we were basically saying we think this is the year that shared mobility has gone from a should. Like a lot of the conversations has been around, you know, savings emissions and reducing congestion, and we really should look at new ways for people to get to work. It's gone from a should to a must, I think, is what's happened. You know, example of that is buses now have to run at basically 50% capacity to maintain social distancing. That's very, very, very hard to do in an old fixed route, fixed schedule system. You know, we're talking to bus operators where they either have empty buses because no one wants to use them, or they're full by stop 2, and then everybody who was waiting for the bus is let down. So yeah, this terrible mix of not feeling safe, but also not trusting the availability of the service. And so, you know, technology, I guess, like ours and some others, can help with those things. But yeah, it's shifting behavior. You've seen, I mean, try buying a bike in the US at the moment. It's almost impossible. So everyone's biking, so that's fantastic. We may have seen a real sort of breaking of the back of work from home, in that people now start to look at it in a practical way and less kind of with this fear of the unknown. So that will help to a certain extent with congestion. But then there's still, you know, public transit still has to play a really important role, but it's probably going to have to evolve quite a bit to meet the new needs of commuters, you know, as in a COVID world.
So what is a solution then with a big bus that can operate at 50% capacity and trying to reduce those emissions? Is the solution like a smaller sized bus?
Yeah, I think there's that can help. I think what we're seeing is that, and this was coming as well, is that there's been a realization that for transit agencies and bus operators, they're really in this constant state of trying to manage the quality of the service, so the convenience of the service versus the utilization or the sort of efficiency of that service. And when you're running buses or any sort of transit in a really high density, high occupancy area, like, you know, through the middle of Manhattan, or, you know, in those major sort of trunk roads, that's quite easy. The challenge there is just capacity. Get as many buses going as you possibly can and they'll be full. You step outside of that into our suburbs and our sort of more low density areas, which is really characterized, you know, most cities in America, that's becoming the majority of how people live. Then it's a guessing game as to where people will want the bus and when. And so a lot of agencies have found themselves in a place where, to provide a service that's useful enough to get people to step away from their cars, there's this leap of faith where they may have a service that has very few people on it. You then compound that challenge now with, I can only allow half as many people on the buses at one time, and I've got great uncertainty around when they'll be full. And that's where I think a technology can really play a role. So like with our technology, you can shift the old traditional bus to, I guess, or I know the schedule, so I know where it's going to stop. I have to guess at how many people will be on it and hope that it's all going to work out. And for the operator, they have to go, look, we'll run the old bus and hope that it all works out, to a demand responsive service where as a passenger, I book my trip, just like I do with, with other car sharing apps like Uber and Lyft that we've all become so used to. I book the trip, I can see the bus arrive, I know that I've got a seat, I know that the capacity is being controlled, so social distancing will immediately be there when I get on board. For the operator, they have certainty around their demand and they're able to sort of optimize their vehicles to have the best utilization that they possibly can. And I think that's really where the opportunity lies, is to shift away from the old ways of sort of guessing as to where to put buses and hope that they would be a good service, to technology which you can enable you to sort of book in real time or book, a week, 2 weeks in advance, book your travel out. And even, we're looking now at, you can book your own seat, just like what everyone's expecting on airlines now. And you can kind of show people that we've booked you a seat and there's 2 seats between you and the next person. So it's as safe as it could possibly be. And all of those things we're seeing being played out globally, and it's gradually chipping away at this fear that people have of returning back to public transit. We even had the CDC change their guidelines relatively quietly, but they changed their guidelines this week. From a couple of weeks ago, they'd said everyone should just drive on their own back to work. That's the safest. There was a lot of feedback from the mobility world that that's not going to be good for cities. And they've now changed it towards saying, look, shared mobility that recognises all the social distancing and onboard cleaning and all those things that we need to do to stay safe under COVID. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work being done to just try and get people back to public transit so we don't end up with cities that are car parks yet again.
So in the US, are there specific municipalities that you're currently working with?
Yeah, so there's a few. We've got some work that we're doing up in Seattle. So they're looking at a range of challenges there. Seattle's got, and sort of Washington State has some really interesting kind of regional challenges. There's small towns that are trying to work out how they get people around their town. They've got some issues around connecting people into the city as well. So we've been working on a few services there. Also up in Detroit and Michigan. So the Michigan Department of Transit has really started to take a leadership position around shared mobility. They've gotten some grant money and put some funding out to some of their more rural communities. So we're looking at how we can support them, because they've been hit really hard. I mean, the second all of this happened, they had 70, 80% drop in the use of public transit, because if you live in a rural community, you probably have a car and you've just gone back to it with COVID. So they're facing a real challenge to get ridership back so that they can maintain a service that is quite essential for those rural communities as well. So there've been a couple. There's down in Florida as well. There's some real efforts being put in there to improve shared mobility and sort of advance the technology that they're using for that. So similarly, they have communities where they're quite spread out. It's kind of the way Florida's spread out and grew. So they've had these challenges, and it's just gotten worse. So yeah, I think most of our interest so far has really been in a kind of rural or urban sort of environment where these communities are now really sort of struggling with maintaining an essential service like public transit.
Mm-hmm. And I think as more people get tested for the antibodies, and they'll feel more confident about getting on public transit or getting on a bus with other people. Like, I've been in an airplane, I have the antibodies. I don't mind sitting 2 seats away from someone. And in New York City, a quarter of the population has the antibodies. So I think that'll increase as time goes on throughout the world and country. Yeah,
I think as we start to learn more, I think there's just such uncertainty and unknowns about this virus and how it works. I guess that's another nice side effect of this sorts of technology, is that if you're getting people to book their trip, you've really created a contact tracing capability for your service. And so, if there is another sort of outbreak, or you have passengers who end up contracting the virus, you've got the data to see who has gotten on board our transit and therefore has had contact, and then you can sort of mitigate the possibility of that spreading, which, you know, everyone is saying that's a fundamental part of our response to this. Is there will be people who get COVID who've had contact with others, and if we know who they are, we can respond and react faster and contain, you know, the damage of that. So yeah, I guess that's sort of another aspect of it, but it's changing all the time. Everyone's learning. There's ultraviolet light treatment coming in. There's all sorts of things that are little UV robots. I don't know if you've seen those.
Right.
I think they've just put them in the airport in Detroit, and they go around and UV zap everything. So there's all sorts of things. But I think what's happened is everyone's gone from this is a short-term thing to this is reality now. This
Right.
is how we have to operate. So that has a ripple effect through every aspect of public transit and commuting. I mean, even payments, like most public transit has been stuck with having to take cash and all these different payment forms, and it's really slowed them in sort of wanting to innovate. This has forced a lot of change there, where cash is just not safe, so they've had to shift to other methods. So yeah, you know, some of these things will be good, but not without their challenges as we go through it.
Right. And it's cool to be working in a technology company at this time where your routes are dynamic and your adaptations, everything is dynamic and happening in real time.
Yeah, look, we think it's the way. We think it has a lot of benefits to add to public transit. Certainly, there's still space for just fixed route, but it's less and less of the puzzle. There's a new way that we can do things, really, and it's been coming for a while. And you know, huge disruptions like this, the good part of them is that they force us to change, because change is never easy. It involves friction. And for public transit agencies who have very sort of set mandates and funding structures and kind of bureaucracies that they have to work through, change is often even harder. But an event like this forces change. They can't just go and buy twice as many buses to meet the demand. That's not going to work. They have to find new ways of doing things. And yeah, we think, you know, technology like ours presents a real opportunity. We typically find any transit system that we go into, we can generally create a sort of between 30 to 50% efficiency. So that means either you can get rid of 30 to 50% of your fleet if you're not going to get more demand, or you can get 30 to 50% more ridership out of your existing fleet by running a dynamic service. So, you know, we think that's an option that is pretty needed for transit agencies at the moment, who are struggling for money, ridership, and maintaining a service.
Right. It all makes sense. Thank you so much, Jacob Grieg, for joining us from Liftango.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having us, Skye, and congratulations on what's been a great series.
Thank you.